trust you all enjoyed your lunch and the resource tables and some great networking time. If you still have lunch to eat, please feel free to continue doing so, but we're going to go ahead and get started. You're going to meet our individuals who are serving on our panel in just a moment, but before they come up, I just want to take an opportunity to say to them thank you for what you contribute to the community on a daily basis. Thank you for your time today in sharing your experiences and what you're seeing, and thank you for your contribution to the community collaboration today. You are the experts in the trenches, so to speak, and your experience and expertise is valued. This information will help us make the best decisions possible for our community's needs. That said, I'd like to invite our panelists to come take their place on the stage at this time. And I'd also like to invite back up Cole Medina, the Executive Director of the Kitsap Community Foundation, to moderate our panel discussions.
No, I'm not sitting. I'm standing. Okay. Our 7 panelists have arrived. Thank you all for doing this for us. In a moment, I'll give you a chance to introduce yourselves. We're going to take an hour and a half for this panel. We really want to focus on poverty in general and poverty here in our community. This is how it will work. I'll give them each a minute to just briefly introduce themselves and describe the type of work that they do, what organization they work for. And then I have a list of questions that I will ask them. Or I should say, I will ask them one and let them each answer the first question. And if at that point, people in the crowd want to start asking questions, raise your hand and we'll start taking questions from the crowd. We'd really prefer to answer the questions that you all want answered, not the questions that we've prepared in advance. But if no one has any questions you want to ask after the first question I ask, I'll just ask another one until we talk about something that's so interesting it inspires questions in all of you. And once we get to the point that you're asking questions, I'm not going to ask each of the 7 panelists to provide an answer to everyone's question. I'll just ask 2 or 3 panelists to provide an answer to the question, or if more panelists are really dying to answer a particular question, we'll let them do that. But I don't want to bog us down by making everyone give 7 answers to every question that gets asked. So when you do ask a question, feel free to direct it to the panelist who you would like to have answer it, or the 2 panelists you would like to have answer it. With that said, I think we'll get started. So maybe we just start here with Julie, and if you could introduce yourselves, just kind of try to keep it short if you could to about a minute.
I'm Julie Graves.
You move it a little closer.
Closer?
Just pick it up and drag it over.
I'm Julie Graves. I'm the Director of Asset Management for Housing Kitsap. I've been with Housing Kitsap for 15 and a half years, and before that I worked for Kitsap Mental Health for about 7 and a half. So I've been working in the housing industry for a long time.
My name is Monica Bernard, and I'm the manager of the Housing Solutions Center. The Housing Solutions Center has been in operation for 2 years now. We provide a single point of entry for everyone that's homeless or at risk of homelessness, maybe facing eviction or looking for affordable housing solutions. We have offices, we have a partnership with North Kitsap Fish Line to serve the north end, South Kitsap KCR for the south end, a main site in Bremerton, and through a partnership with Coffee Oasis, we serve the youth and young adults. So last year, as was mentioned this morning, 2,819 families were served by the Housing Solutions Center.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Steve Strand. I'm the Chief of Police for the City of Bremerton, and I've been here about a year. It goes very quickly. I've been in law enforcement for 26 years, and I was formerly with the King County Sheriff's Office and with the City of Kent Police Department there. So I've got some diversity of experience in this area, and I first of all would say thank you for paying attention to this. It's an area of interest for me, Habitat for Humanity, some of the social service agencies that I've been involved with. And I say this only half jokingly, but I often describe law enforcement as first-line social work. And we are sort of that first point of contact in both a very negative and sometimes a positive sense. And so the individuals you're talking about are important to us. And you don't read about it in the paper, but the day-to-day work of our officers it impacts some of the things you're talking about. And hopefully we can be positive. How do we do this in a better way? So I'm hoping to learn as much from my panelists, be more coming this way than going that way. So thank you.
I'm Scott Lindquist. I'm the health officer for Kitsap Public Health District. I've been here about 13 years. I'm a pediatrician by training, and I am the product of intergenerational poverty, the first in my family to go to college. So I dedicated my life to being a pediatrician in public health and social justice, and I'll unveil a lot of that in my own opinions about how you break the cycle of poverty, etc.
Hello, my name is,
Mic's not on.
let's try that, oh, that's better. My name is Kirsten Jewell. I'm the Homeless and Housing Grant Program Manager for the Kitsap Regional Coordinating Council, which is our local council of governments that includes our 4 cities, our 2 tribes, and our county commissioners. I work with our local elected officials in our community to invest about $1.5 million in homeless programs throughout the community each year. We currently are contracting with 17 different social service organizations in the community to provide homeless services, case management, employment training, a whole range of different services that support people from homelessness to self-sufficiency. And I've had the privilege of working in this field for about 10 years now. Thank you.
That other mic should be working if you try it again.
Of course it is. All right, it is working. Great, thanks, Cole. My name is Michelle Reed. I'm the superintendent in the South Kitsap School District. It's my 8th month with the South Kitsap School District. It seems a little longer sometimes. Anyhow, it's my 33rd year in education. I serve a district of about 10,000 kids, just over 1,200 employees, and right now our free and reduced lunch rate is at 40%. So 40% of our 10,000 kids are at or below the poverty level. And obviously, we're one of those folks that make the first contact with the police department when we have issues that are involved in that. So the predominant part of my career in education has been spent at the high school. Been a high school principal for a long time and so forth. So a lot of those 16-year-olds that we talked about this morning, I've worked with. So thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
And I'm Larry Iyer, the Executive Director at Kitsap Community Resources. I've been there for many, many years, and it's kind of fun to look out among the crowd and so many of you that I work with today, and then many I've run into that I worked with years ago, so this has been great. Our purpose is to identify unmet needs of low-income people within Kitsap County, and then work with private and public partners to address those needs. And so over the years, that means we've done lots of work with early learning services and food and nutrition, homelessness and housing and employment areas, energy and weatherization, working with specialty populations like veterans, among other things.
Okay. Thank you all again very much for being here. You've agreed to be up here on the hot seat. You don't know what questions are coming your way, but I'm sure you'll give great answers. Well, I should say, you know what questions I'm going to ask you. I'm going to ask you the first one now. And I chose some questions that I hoped would get people thinking. On its face, this question might sound a little, insulting or rude, but I actually heard it from someone on this panel at a meeting I was at recently. That was you, Kirsten. And the question is, what's the problem with poverty? Why is poverty a bad thing? Why don't we start with Julie?
So one of the things we talked about when Kirsten asked that question was there's really nothing wrong with poverty in and of itself. It's the consequences of poverty that are the problem. So lack of health care, hunger. Sometimes people who are really poor don't have the same options that many of the rest of us have. And so they may do something that looks like a really bad choice, but that may have been the best choice they had with the options that were in front of them. So I thought it was a really wise and insightful question. The other thing we talked a little bit about is that based on the way that we measure income, and we, especially as a housing authority, we're always looking at area median income, and so we're always going to have people at or below 30% of median income and 50%, 60%. That's just the way it is. So from that perspective, we're always going to have people living in poverty, and so the poverty isn't the problem, it's the consequences.
Well, I guess I take a slightly different perspective on that because, and I don't want it to be misunderstood, I don't think being poor is a bad thing. I think that when you are poor, when you're living below the poverty line, even when you're living just above the poverty line, you are so challenged to make any of your basic needs met. And as I look at, I saw a woman with a 3-week-old child that's, going into shelter a couple of months ago. And I thought about my own children, and I thought, what a different trajectory. One is in poverty, where will they be in 18 years? Whereas my own children would have expected nothing else but then to pursue education and go on to college. And so to me, it could be the consequences, but it's also just the inherent limitations that poverty brings into people's lives.
I'll be brief, and I just and we have this conversation with our officers quite often, and we talk a lot about cultural competency and cultural communication, and the officers will sort of roll their eyes and say, yeah, I took that class. But there's a pastor in South King County, Reverend Jimmy James, and we've discussed some of his work here in the last couple of months, and he couches it not in terms of cultural communication and perception, and I'm talking about law enforcement perception. He said, talk about poverty and how different that is, and we ask our officers, have any of you really not known if you're going to have something to eat tonight? And they'll all go, I've never had to worry about that. Have you really had to worry about where you're going to sleep tonight? No, I never have. It's never crossed my mind. It never crossed my mind that I wouldn't go to college. And then we begin to segue that into, there's a point to my story, we segue that a little bit into resiliency. That's what's wrong with poverty, is you lose your resiliency. When I was growing up, and the doctor will have a different perspective on this, I'd be interested to hear what he says, because when I was growing up, middle-class kid, I could fail a test, I could get arrested for something minor, I could do something wrong, I could fail a test, and I knew that it would be okay, I'd get through that, we'd power through that, not a big deal. It would be disappointing, but it would be okay. Poverty takes away your resiliency, and you can't get through those things, it just spins you downward. And when we talk to our officers about that and how different that is and what they bring to the interaction with the officer, it's like a little light bulb going off and you can see people nodding. So that's what's wrong with poverty, is it takes away your resiliency, and that means that people much more often are dealing with folks like us.
Poverty sucks. I don't know how to sugarcoat it any more than that. When you're 5 years old and you're sitting in kindergarten, they say, all right, all you kids that are on free and reduced lunch, raise your hand because we're going to distribute the milk, and you got to raise your hand. That's probably one of the first tastes, I think, of poverty. It sucks. But it doesn't mean that you have to have an unhappy life. So I wouldn't say poverty is not having a joyful, happy life, but in the world of health, I will stick to these comments, that you can almost predict the health of a nation in this world by the difference in the lowest paid line worker and the executive in that company. That difference predicts health to a T. Why does the US rank so poorly in health against some of our neighbors? Why does Japan have one of the best health outcomes ever? By the way, who set that in place, that there's that natural limitation between what the lowest person and the highest person makes in a company? That was an American. MacArthur set that in a constitutional setting for Japan. So we know in healthcare, poverty predicts your outcomes, okay?
Well, first I wanted to say that I asked that question in a room of extremely dedicated social service providers, and I asked it in a way to be kind of provocative, because I wanted to get beyond what we use poverty. I think we use the term poverty as shorthand for something, for a lot of things. And I wanted to really think about, and get us all to think about, what are the roots of poverty? So what is poverty shorthand for? What are the actual things that are causing that to happen? And then what are the results from that, that situation of poverty? And I don't have the answers to that. I just want to ask the question, and I want to talk about the question, because it's a complicated problem. It's a wicked problem. If we knew how to solve this problem, we would have done it a long time ago. And sometimes I like to think of it as it's a symptom of a breakdown in our society. And I'm paraphrasing someone, but we are only as strong as the least among us. And as long as our society is willing to sit and let this situation continue and let people live without choice, because I think poverty really is, as others have alluded to, a lack of choices. You know, a lot of times I hear people talking about, oh, they're in poverty because they made bad choices in their life. And I think, wait a minute, you know, if your choice is to feed your children or put gas in your car, that's not really a choice. Yeah. You know, that's a lack of choice. That's a survival. So I really hope that we can have a great conversation today and springboard it into some really great programs and ideas for what to do in our community. Thank you.
So I think at the end of the day, poverty affects access to resources, libraries, the internet, conversations, and I think that creates challenges for us in the schools. With high expectations, you have to have high support, otherwise you just have frustration. And other than that, I think everything else that I would say has been said.
So part of it goes back to how we define poverty, but certainly it's not just a matter of income, although that's a big part of it, but also, according to definition, is associated with deprivation. And I think what results in so often is a sense of suffering and a sense of injustice and hopelessness that people have. It takes so much energy for those who are struggling in poverty to take care of the basic needs of themselves and their families, that they get in a really, makes it become that much harder to do those things or participate in those things or access those things that they need to be able to move on out. And then I just also wanted to add, from the society point of view, I think poverty is a bad thing. It's a terrible underutilization of the human resource. That were people not in poverty, so often they could be contributing so much to our communities and to our overall economy.
Before we move on and take some questions from the crowd, I noticed you guys can't actually see them because this podium's in the way. So I'm going to move this podium back. Just bear with me for a minute. Hey, look. Okay. Are there any questions from the crowd right now, following up on anything you've heard here? Yeah. Wait, we're going to make all these questions go into a mic, so wait for the mic, please.
So with the question, what is wrong with poverty? I think sometimes what I see is that poverty has become criminalized. As more, poverty's always been around. But I wonder in your jobs, as you see people coming, second and third generation, living in poverty. Obviously, we tie that now to crime rate, which I think sometimes ties into the lack of accessibility of resources. So I'm wondering, as in your experience, how do we, or is the discussion, how do we decriminalize poverty and bring it back to the roots of what's causing it, as opposed to making it trying to be impoverished?
So I'd actually like to start with Chief Strand on that one. I know you're not really talking about it as a criminal activity, but
That's a fascinating question, and one that is very important to ask. And I'm saying this again as a 26-year cop. I've been a chief for 10 years. Very, very brief story. When I was in high school in the Midwest, southern Minnesota, I lived in a college town, so lots of professors' kids. And some kids blew up a mailbox, a U.S. mailbox with explosives, and it was a big deal. And there were some kids that were suspected, and there were kids from the wrong side of the tracks. And the community was, those kids, they could have killed someone and they need to go to prison. And it turned out to be two professors' kids that were going to college that fall. And it was, well, these are just kids. We shouldn't overreact.